Hi, I'm Joe, and today we are going to give a very brief introduction to Python variables and how they work. Now, the basic data types in Python are integer, float, string, list, set, tuple, and dictionary. We're not going to go into any depth on these today, but we'll give you an introduction to how variables work, and then we'll have future videos that go into detailed explanations of each of these data types. So unlike C and Java variables, Python variables are not declared prior to use. So if you're familiar with Java, for example, you have to declare x as an integer before you can assign a 5 to it. In Python, you just say x equals 5. The Python interpreter knows from the data that you assign to x what data type to make the x. So in Java, you might say string s equals hey. In Python, you just say s equals hey. And Python knows that s is a string. Also, unlike C and Java, variables in Python can change type anytime on the fly. So this is nice. In Java, if you say int x, they're telling Java that x is an integer data type, and then you try to assign a string to x, you will get an error. In Python, you can say x equals 5, and then you can say x equals hey, and then you can say x equals 3.84. So 3 different data types. You can change the data type of x anytime you want just by assigning a new value to it. The Python interpreter has no problem with that. Now you can use the type function to get the data type of a variable. So x equals 5, you can put type x, and Python will kick it back class int, which tells you that x is a type integer. If you say x equals 3.84, type x, Python tells you x is a floating point value. If you say x equals hey, type x, class str, which means string. So Python has this type function that can tell you exactly what data type any variable is. It's very convenient. All variables in Python are reference variables, meaning that the variable contains a memory address to where the data is stored. The data is not stored in the variable, it's stored in a reference memory address. So I'm going to explain what that means. If you say x equals 5 in Python, what you're really doing is what happens inside Python behind the scenes. Python picks a memory address, in this case 305.81024. It picks this memory address, it plops a 5 in it. That's your data. Now it sets up an x and it says, guess what? The data for x is stored at this memory address. So this memory address is a pointer to the value that x has. Okay? So x contains the memory address where 5 is stored. The 5 is not stored here where x is. The 5 is stored in the memory address that x references. Okay? So these are called reference variables. Now, if you change that 5, or if you change the x rather, if you say x plus equals 2, what happens in Python behind the scenes? Well, Python is going to pick a new memory address. It's going to assign the 7 to that memory address, and then it's going to update this pointer. So x now points to memory address 1028, where the 7 is stored. Now the 5 is still there, as you can see. It's still there. It's just not in use right now. But the x memory address stored at x now points to the 7. Let me demonstrate in Python how the memory addresses actually work. So if you say x equals 5, and then we can use the id function of x to show the memory address that x is located at. So there's the memory address that x is at. And now if we change x to 7, we'll just say x plus equals 2. We'll increment it by 2. So now x equals 7. And we say ID of x. You can see that x changed to a different memory address. Now if we say y equals 5, ID of y, you can see that y is now assigned to the same value in memory that x was originally at 5. To explain what's happening there, Python, most variables are immutable. That means they don't change in place. So you would expect the variable to just change its value, but it doesn't. What Python actually does behind the scenes, it sets up a new value in a different memory location and then puts that memory location at x. And that's because the variables are immutable, so they don't change in place. Python creates a new value in a different location. Okay, so this is a summary of the data types in Python. As you can see, integers, floats, strings, and tuples are all immutable. And lists, sets, and dictionaries are all mutable, which means they can be changed in place. Variable names, for the naming convention, variable names are normally all lowercase letters, except for the first letter of each word following the first word. And usually you try to use descriptive names to make it much easier to understand what your program is doing. Not only for other people to follow what your program is doing, but also for you. Because 3 months after you wrote a program, you come back and look at it, you're going to have a real hard time remembering what X is or N. So a good descriptive variable name like first name instead of N. And again, you can see my case here, right? We used a capital N for the name and lowercase for everything else. This is a convention among computer programmers. So if just using N for a name, you're very likely to forget later on and have to figure out what N means. Month instead of M, socket number instead of SKT or S, weight in grams instead of WT, right? Because you may forget whether the weight was in pounds or kilograms or what. Shoe color instead of just C. So my advice is use good descriptive variable names for all your variables. You'll have a much easier time deciphering what your code is doing later on. And other people who have to use your code, if you're working in a company writing code, are going to have a much easier time figuring out what your code is doing. Now, constants usually use all caps for variable names. So if you use a constant that never changes in your program, say something like pi for calculating the area or circumference of a circle, pi is always going to be 3.14, so you would normally declare pi as a variable at the beginning of the program using all caps for pi to indicate that it's a constant. So any other constants you define in your program, you typically would use all uppercase letters for those. And one juicy little tidbit to close out here, swapping variables is so easy in Python. If you ever have one value in X and another value in Y and you want to swap those, in Java you have to create a new variable called temp, assign X to temp, assign Y to X, assign temp to Y. It's a 3-step process to swap a variable, swap two variables. In Python, very smooth and easy. X comma Y equals Y comma X. That's the beauty of Python. Make sure to tune in for our future detailed videos on specific data types in Python. I'm Joe James. Thanks for watching.